Hi, Misha here, and I've got another top video for you. This is going to be the top 8 handguns, sidearms from World War II. And here are the ground rules. These have to be designs that were manufactured during the war, not just guns that were, made before, say, World War I period and then used through World War II, because that'd be pretty much everything. And also only one gun per nation. And I'm going to do 2 at a time, kind of trying to do one from each side, Axis and Allies. So starting off in the number 8 and 7 position, we have the British Enfield number 2 Mark I Star revolver, and the Italian Beretta. And this is a model 1935, which is in 32 7.65 Browning. Also, the standard was the the Beretta model 1934, which was in 9mm Corto, which was 380. And the Enfield number 2 is chambered for 38-200, which is essentially the British version of 38 Smith & Wesson. And these are both on the list because I actually like these guns, but they're kind of very behind the times in a lot of ways, but still good guns for what they were. The Enfield, of course, is a traditional top break, very much like the older Webley's. It is a double action only, although the original Mark I was single double action, 6-shot cylinder, pretty fixed sights. I actually really like the grips on these. They're kind of cool. Obviously the fact that a revolver was still the standard in Britain during World War II when everyone else was going to automatics says a lot. But, this was designed as a defensive gun. It was reliable, easy to make. And the reason they went from .455 to 38 was for a defensive gun. They felt this would be better. It allowed the gun to be lighter weight. It had less felt recoil. A soldier could carry more ammunition, and it was a little more accurate, easier to aim. So again, for a defensive gun, it was felt to be sufficient. And the same can really be said for the Beretta here, be it the 34 or the 35. Yeah, 32, 380 are not especially powerful cartridges, but for a defensive gun, it was allowed to be simple, robust, easy to manufacture. This is a straight blowback, single action only. But for all that, a reliable, durable gun. And actually, these would stay in Italian service well into the 1950s and even into the 60s. Some not being replaced until the 80s even. So they were actually very good, if not remarkable at all, guns. And they were used by both sides in Italy. While the trigger is not great on the Beretta, it is a very good feeling gun. The machining quality is quite outstanding. And there's nothing wrong with the Enfield revolver's quality either, for what they were. See, typical top break. And they're both pretty iconic, especially the Enfield, although some people might mistake it for the older Webley. So I thought these are very firmly should be on the list. And so there we have it. We'll move on. So, moving on. to the 5th and 6th place, we have France's SACM, SACM, 1935A, and the Japanese Nambu Type 14. I mean, you guys knew this would be on the list with my thing for Japanese. To be fair, it definitely makes the list, but it's not perfect, but I still really like it. The French gun, 1935A, as you can tell by the name, actually wasn't selected until 1935 and was put into production before World War II. It, along with the 1935S, were the standard. Both fired the 7.65 long cartridge. Were single action only. Mag fed. Pretty typical. What's good about these guns, the ergonomics are outstanding. The curve of the grip. We have a Browning style mag release. Quite a nice slim slide. Safety's not great, but I feel like they were such a good design that this ultimately led to the SIG P210. Of course, the caliber itself, while more potent than 32, 7.65 Browning, is kind of the downfall, especially today with collectors, because you cannot find 7.65 long. And it was accurate, but not especially powerful. And again, this is still a single action only and single stack 8-shot gun. So while the ergonomics are very good, it wasn't especially revolutionary. But that said, it was manufactured after World War II in France and served into the 1950s and even with some police departments into the 1960s. The Nambu is kind of a similar story, believe it or not. It too has good ergonomics. The grip has a nice angle, kind of very Luger-esque. Cocking handle on the back, it's pretty easy to cock. This was created in the 1920s, went into production in the late 20s, and was manufactured all the way through World War II. It had a few oddities and shortcomings. For example, the 8mm Nambu 8x22 cartridge it fired wasn't especially powerful. A lot of people liken it to .380. It's more powerful than that, but it doesn't achieve anything like 9mm Parabellum. On the other hand, it was very accurate and had very little recoil and produced very little muzzle flash or smoke, so it did not obscure the sight of the shooter. It too has a Browning style mag release, but on the other hand of that, the safety is clunky. This was added to the design very late, and it was literally added by committee, so it kind of shows that it wasn't really thought out. It's a toggle safety. You have to flip it 180 degrees. You basically have to use the second hand with it. I mean, it's there, but it's definitely not something you can disengage quickly. This has a very nice trigger. In fact, it probably has the nicest trigger of any standard issue service gun of World War II. That also aided with accuracy along with the good ergonomics. The gun, while kind of long because of the barrel, is actually well balanced and not heavy. But one of the other shortcomings, it's a striker fired gun, so much like your modern day Glock, and there was an issue with the striker spring, the firing pin spring either wearing out, or the firing pin itself breaking. So much so that they issued these with spare firing pins. So the pistol was a mixed bag, but it had a lot of good aspects. early on, before Japan was losing the war. These are made to a very high degree, a very high standard. And of course the French guns were as well. They were also made in France under Nazi occupation. And I just thought, you don't hear a lot about the 1935 on lists of World War II handguns, so I thought it would be an interesting choice to put on the list. And again, I had to put a Japanese gun on the list, but I have to be fair about it. They weren't perfect, but I definitely think they have earned their spots here. This is a very iconic piece of history for the war in the Pacific. So, with that said, we'll continue on. So, moving on to numbers 3 and 4. We have two pistols that have a great deal in common, but are also very different in execution. We have America's model 1911A1. I know some might be disappointed that this isn't at the top of the list, but I have to be fair about it. And I'm kind of stretching a point with this one. This is the Soviet Tokarev TT-33. And yes, of course, Russia and America were allies during the war. But it was more of a, enemy of my enemy situation. And let's not forget that Russia, at the beginning in 1939, had a non-aggression pact with Hitler. So, either way, I wanted to kind of put these together because these are both Browning designs. Well, the 1911 more so. The Tokarev was more of a copy of a copy. But still yet, both use the Browning tilting barrel. Also, both use a pretty souped up cartridge. The pistols you've looked at so far may be a little bit underwhelming. Of course, the 45 ACP is well known for its stopping power, being a big old bullet. Of course, the downside of that is 45 ACP is a relatively slow-moving bullet. In fact, it's subsonic. Whereas the Tokarev takes kind of an opposite approach. It fires 7.62 by 25 Tokarev, which is a 30 caliber bullet, but it's a bottlenecked bullet, and it's nearly a magnum round. It is quite powerful. So it's a smaller, but much faster, much greater penetration than 45. Of course, the 1911A1, while it was adopted in 1926 and produced through World War II, really is just an updated version of the 1911 used in World War I, and that's why it's not any higher on the list. By World War II, this was a little bit of a dated pistol. It's single action only, 7-shot magazine, pretty basic sights. It is long and rather heavy, and takes a little bit of training to learn how to shoot accurately. It was reliable for its day, but probably not the most reliable. The Tokarev is a little bit lighter, a little bit slimmer, 8-round magazine, also single action, also with a Browning mag release. This one's a wartime model, so it has wood grips. Most you find will have bakelite. It was created from the 1930 model, the TT-30. Basically just updated a little bit to correct a few issues and also streamline it for mass production. And that's really what the Tokarev excels, is it was very cheap and quick to build. It has very few unnecessary parts. In fact, there's no screws in this whole gun. That also meant it was easy for unit armors to maintain. Pretty much all the guts are in the trigger pack, so if you had something wrong with your hammer, or even feed lip. She just pulled that pack out and replaced it. So it was kind of the gun that Russia needed for that war, and they produced these in the millions. Of course, this would stay in standard service until being replaced by the Makarov throughout the 1950s and into the 60s. And of course, the 1911 A1 would remain the standard issue until being officially replaced by the Beretta M9 in 1985, although it would take several years for all of them to be pulled out of service, and the Marines would hang on to their own variants for even longer. So, very long-lived pistol. And of course, most of you know about it. So, no list of World War II guns would be complete, and lots of people use these. These were given as Lend-Lease guns to Britain, France, and even Russia. But I think both of these are very iconic World War II pistoles. And they're both getting a little hard to find, at least all originals these days. So yeah, I think they definitely should be on the list, but neither is terribly revolutionary. So, kind of more classic World War I inspired designs. Well, let's get to our top pistols. First, though, let's have a couple of honorable mentions from two neutral nations in the war. The Swedish Husqvarna M40 Lottie and the Swiss Luger. And I'm letting this in the video because this is a model 1929. This is the Swiss variant that they were definitely making throughout the World War II period. So, it fits. I mean, I couldn't really do this video without some kind of Luger, right? And both of these fire a 9mm Parabellum, 9x19. Of course, the M40 is a license-built version of the Finnish L35 Lottie. But more of these were made, and Sweden was technically neutral, whereas Finland was not. So this seemed to fit better. And of course, Switzerland was quite well known for being neutral. And this is a neat variation too. It's simplified, but it's also made much more robust. And reliable. And I just realized something. I said this was 9mm Parabellum. I apologize. This one is 30 caliber Luger, 7.65 Parabellum. Many apologies. It's late at night, guys. But yeah, the Swiss really took... This is often considered the ultimate Luger. It fixed a lot of the earlier issues. They did simplify it. They made it cheaper, more efficient to mass produce. But while at it, they corrected a few things. They also gave it a slightly longer barrel. And it still retains the old style grip safety, but they enlarged it. It's just a really nice gun. This one is a very late production with the black grips. There's also, kind of the fire engine or brick red. And with the Swedish Lottie, in a lot of ways, people mix this up for being a Luger itself, but it's not. It's a very different action. It has kind of a wedge, and it cocks more like an Ambu in the back here. It's a much heavier gun, though. Very sturdy. Very smooth. These have very nice single-action triggers. Everything in these move very smoothly. They even have a little device in here called the bolt accelerator to make sure they function reliably in the cold. But still, yeah, they're just a single action only. 8-round mag. And there were some issues with Lotties cracking, but really they didn't surface until after World War II, and a lot of times it was because they were putting extra hot machine gun ammo. When used with appropriate pistol ammo, really these were very solid guns. And either way, they stayed in both Finland and Sweden in their militaries all throughout the 50s and 60s, so couldn't have been too bad. And it's a different design. It's just something I've always really liked. And the same goes for the Swiss Luger. There's a few different variants of this, but since we're doing World War II, and with the stipulations of this video, these aren't really on the numbered list since they're not in Axis or Allies, but, you know, I just thought it would be really fun to include these, so hope you enjoyed them. We have history videos on both if you'd like to learn more. But with that, let's move on to number 1, number 2. And number 1 and number 2, this is truly a tie. And I'll explain why. And I bet you've guessed what these are. What I think were the best military service sidearms of the Second World War, the FN Browning High Power and the Walther P38. These are both chambered for 9mm 9x19 parabellum. And really they date to just about the same time period, though you might argue the high power is a little older. Reasons. From a technical standpoint, both of these contain elements that would pretty much make and influence all of the post-war guns, even the guns we use today. The high power is pretty much the final culmination of the Browning design. It took his original tipping barrel design and really simplified it and refined it, giving excellent reliability. But of course, its big claim to fame is its, obviously not drop free, double stack magazine. Originally it held 13 rounds, but it's pretty much the same pattern of mag that many pistols use to this very day. And that's really where the high power excels. So the reliability in the mag. As for the P38, it has more to do with its mechanical function. This was the first military issue, full production, double and single action, sorry guys, gun. It was also standard with a safety decocker, which made this safe to be carried with one in the pipe. That was a standard feature. It doubled as a true safety. Or if you used it and inflicted off, you're back to double action mode. This system has been used, copied, and is pretty much identical today as it was then. Also internally, this uses a wedge system for the barrel, which really helps with accuracy and making it smooth, and as most of you know, what Beretta copied first for its model 951, which directly led to the model 92, which became the M9. So mechanically this was hugely influential, but of course it has the old heel style mag release and the standard 8-round single stack mag. So it's conventional in the magazine sense, but very advanced in its trigger system, whereas The high power is the opposite. Its magazine is highly advanced, but its trigger is a more conventional single action, like the older 1911 and other Browning designs. And it just has a thumb safety here. So it was conventional, a little behind the times when it came to the trigger. So again, if you take elements from both of these, you pretty much have the modern, or at least 20th century, military service gun. As far as a historical point of view, the high power is the gun that was used on both sides. It was developed in Belgium by FN. Of course, when Nazi Germany took control of that nation, they kept this in production for their own uses for the Axis. Whereas the design was sent over and kind of partially reversed engineered, although it did have assistance from the original designer and others in exile in Britain and Canada, which is what this is here. So this is the Canadian high power. This is a number 2 Mark 1. It's also a number 1 Mark 1. And these were used extensively not only by Canada, but also China and Britain and many others. This was pretty iconic on both sides, and it would remain in British service as the L9A1 really up until very recently. And of course, now a lot of later L9A1s would be post-war Belgian manufacture, but quite a few of the old Canadian guns stayed in service, including this one here. This was a British-issued English high power. And the P38 was manufactured in Germany by 3 factories, Walther, Mauser, and Spreewerk, which was actually in Czechoslovakia, an occupied nation. And it was used by nations such as Sweden and Austria during the war. After the war, it was produced in France, who had occupied the Mauser factory. They actually made a large number between 45 and 46. A few were also made in Czechoslovakia after the war. And of course, beginning in 1957, these started to be made in West Germany when Walther was relocated to Ulm. Originally, it was still called the P38, although it had an alloy frame. And the name P38 would continue to be used for police and commercial guns, but of course P1 was the Bundeswehr designation, and this was the standard issue sidearm for the West German military up through the 90s. So, both of these guns well outlasted World War II. Really, they were in service through the entire 20th century. Or, I should say, what remained of it. So I think these are a very firm number 1 and number 2. And definitely deserve to be at the top of this list. So here they all are laid out together. This is a solid wartime Enfield revolver with the bobbed hammer and Bakelite grips. This, like I said, is a 1935 Beretta. This is one made right at the end of the war, right after using wartime parts. This is a immediately pre-war Nambu Type 14. Still has the large trigger guard and the secondary mag spring, but it was still back when they were making them with a high degree of fit and finish. This is a immediate post-war French 35A. This is a pretty typical Remington Rand 1911, made during the war. This is a 1942 TT-33. It's a non-import, and it was a Vietnam bringback. This particular P-38 I pulled out for this video is a 1943, so solid mid-war. And, as I said, this is a Canadian-made Inglis No. 2 Mark I high power that was used in Britain after the war. And, of course, our honorable mentions. This is a relatively late production. Actually, it's a Danish police contract Husqvarna M40. And this is a very, very late production Swiss model 1929 Luger. So I hope you enjoyed, kind of my look and loose ranking of World War II service sidearms. I'd love to hear your own thoughts and opinions in the comments, as always. Any questions, also feel free to post. And if you could, as always, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to help support the channel, please check on the link there and click our Patreon page. We have perks and benefits, so if you'd like to contribute, we try to give back a little bit to show appreciation. Well, with that said, guys, I appreciate you tuning in. And we will catch you very soon next time.